As a fashion photographer, one of the most common things that you'll be asked to shoot is a fashion lookbook, which involves a series of images designed to promote the clothing of a brand or a clothing line. In today's class, we're going to be looking at a real life example of a photo shoot that I produced and photographed for a well-known sports retailer. I'll be providing you with a guide to apply to your own shoots, walking you through the pre-production process, from trying to understand your brief to choosing your models and locations. And then we'll be moving into the production process, the actual photo shoot itself, where we'll be exploring the best practices when it comes to the actual shoot. My name is Sophia Carey and I am a portrait and fashion photographer based in the UK. In the past, I have worked with clients from Nike, Adidas, Reebok, and many more. Shooting fashion lookbooks for different brands across genres is a key part of what I do and what I have been doing for the last few years. If you are looking for a how-to when it comes to fashion lookbooks, when it comes to organising, producing, photographing a fashion lookbook for a fashion brand, then this course is for you. Whether you are a photographer yourself looking to start to shoot lookbooks, or maybe you're a creative director or producer looking to organise one. This class should also be useful if you are a clothing brand owner or director yourself and you're looking to start commissioning photo shoots for your brand. So without saying much more, let's get stuck in. Firstly, thank you so much for joining today's class and for continuing with us in this series of lessons. So during this class, there will be a class project that I want you to keep in mind as we're moving through the lessons. At the end of the class, I'm going to be asking you to submit a series of images to the project gallery that showcase a specific piece of clothing. Bonus points if you are able to showcase more than one piece of clothing from the same line or brand. If that seems a little bit daunting right now, then don't worry. We're going to get stuck straight into this class and I'm going to be talking to you about the best practices and the best tips when it comes to shooting fashion lookbooks. Join me in the next lesson as we explore what a fashion lookbook is. So what is a fashion lookbook? I'd imagine that you probably have some sort of understanding of what a lookbook is. Maybe you've been asked to shoot a lookbook and you just want a little bit of reassurance on how to do it. Or maybe you're a brand and you know that you need a lookbook, but you're not sure really how to get started. A lookbook is there to promote the clothing of a brand or promote a specific clothing line or series of clothes. I differentiate here because there is a culture of bloggers who create lookbooks for brands, but they don't actually own the clothing. Whereas traditional fashion culture would mean that the lookbook focuses on a specific clothing brand. But don't worry, whether you are creating a lookbook for a brand or a blogger, this class will be useful for you. Essentially, a lookbook is there to demonstrate to potential buyers of clothes how they could wear the clothes, as well as showing off like specific details like patterns, graphics, textures that are important for buyers to see. Lookbooks can help to solidify brand image and a brand's place within their niche. So by presenting high quality content, it can also help to elevate the perception of the brand. We all know the concept of not judging a book by its cover, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we live in a society that does judge books by their covers. We are a visual society that trusts brands based on their visual identity. And since a lookbook is such an instrumental part of that brand identity, it's really important to get that sorted from the go. So now we have more of a solid understanding of what a lookbook actually is, and that it's there to promote and sell the clothing. Let's move into the next lesson where we look at how to understand a brief. Now that we understand what a lookbook is, it's important to get into the brief of a lookbook. So when you are working with a client, more often than not, they will provide you with a brief that tells you as a creative what they're looking for from the lookbook. If you're a client yourself, as in you're a brand owner or director, then you will be giving a brief to the creative team. So what are the important things to A, include in a brief, and B, understand from a brief? So firstly, when you're looking at the brief, you want to understand who the brand is. What market are they in? Are they in sport or are they in fast fashion, for example? You're going to want to look at that market and try to look at existing imagery that surrounds that market. So for example, if you know that it's a sport brand that specifically concentrates on basketball, collateral and apparel, then you're going to want to look at who are the leaders in that market. Who else sells basketball apparel? What kind of tone do their images have? And you want to really understand that market because that will give you a good understanding of what the brand wants. You also want to understand if there are any things that are really important to the client's ethos and their brand. So this might be sustainability. That's a big one at the moment. Lots of brands want to be sustainable. It might be affordability. You know, there's a lot of different ideas that brands want to put across within their brand image and their brand identity. If it's not included within your brief, then you can go onto a brand's website or brand socials, see if you can find a little bit more information about them. Or of course, you could just ask your contact, are there any key ethoses, mission statements that I should be aware of? Next, and quite tightly related to the market, the niche, it is important to understand who your target audience is, or who the brand's target audience is. Who are these clothes being sold to? Teenagers, or men between the ages of 24 and 30, older women. It's really important to understand who you're selling to. That's also going to dictate the visual tone of your images. You want to be thinking about where this content is going. Is it going on socials? In which case, is it going on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter? You want to understand where it's going and what it will be used for, and who might see that content. This is important because something that's going on a client's website versus something that's going on their Instagram will be shot differently. So for example, for a website, you might want more horizontal images, space for text overlay, etc. Whereas on socials, it might need to be easily cropped into a square, or it might need to be vertical. And again, it's the same with if it's going on a big billboard or something like that, then you might want to think about the equipment that you're using and if your equipment can manage producing an image that will be able to blow up to that scale. So to recap, you want to understand who the brand is, what they stand for, what market they're in, who they are targeting, and where this content will be going. So I will give you an example of the brief that I was set throughout this project that I'm going to be talking to you throughout this class. So the brand is World Soccer Shop, which is a retailer that sells football/soccer, depending on where you're from, related clothing. So the market is sport, and if you want to really narrow that down even more, it's football. I'm from the UK, so I say football, but if you're American or from other parts of the world, then you probably will say soccer. The brand is American, hence World Soccer Shop. So when I'm looking at other brands that dominate this niche, you're going to look at the front runners like Nike, Adidas, but also other apparel brands that sell collections from all of these different brands, which is a little bit more like what World Soccer Shop do. So in that case, I'm going to be looking at things like classic football shirts, and maybe even Soccer Bible, who create editorials surrounding football. So the target audience, of course, football traditionally is a male-dominated sport, so we are definitely going to be targeting men, but it is also important for it to appeal to women, especially as that market grows. In terms of where the content will appear, this content will be a digital lookbook that users will be able to flick through on web. They'll also be using the images within their web campaigns, so headers, email marketing, and on socials. There might also be extra bits within your brief that you want to understand, key messages and ideas that the client have that are specific to this project. So for example, with this project, World Soccer Shop wanted it to be very UK orientated. It's a shoot for the English Premier League, displaying the kits for the English Premier League, so it needs to look English. They also wanted to collaborate with British artists within UK grime, which is, you know, a really growing sector of the music industry in the UK at the moment. So these were really important key facts for me to think about moving through the development and the pre-production of this shoot. The fact that it needs to look British, and the fact that they want to incorporate UK grime. If you're a brand owner, it's really important that if you have these specific messages you want to convey, that you communicate that within your brief to your creative team. If you're a member of the creative team and you've received the brief and there aren't any key messages, you can double check with the client and ensure that there aren't any that they've just missed out the brief. But most of the time, people will put in the brief quite clearly if there are specific messages they want communicated. So understanding all of that information is going to help you in the next step, where we're going to be building a mood board, a visual mood board, to help us dictate the tone of the shoot. So join me in the next lesson as we get started with mood boards. Once you have a firm understanding of the brief and what you need to provide for the brand, it's time to build a mood board. So the way I think of a mood board is a visual way of communicating the brief. So everything that you've already understood from the brief should be illustrated in your mood board, so that the rest of your team, and we're going to get on to that in a little bit, we're going to talk a bit more about building a team, But a mood board should be visual so that the rest of your team can understand the vision. They understand the vision that you have and what the brand want. So you can draw inspiration from a number of different places, from Pinterest and photo books to the competitors and industry leaders that we identified when looking at the brief. I have another class on Skillshare that I'm going to link in the description that really gets into finding inspiration, developing your ideas from found imagery. So do check that out if you want. But the key takeaway is that you want to use this material as inspiration to create something new. You don't want to copy. So when researching competitors, your research should help you understand the conventions of your niche that you're working with, but you shouldn't try to directly copy their ideas. When it comes to creating the actual mood board, you can do this in a number of ways. You might want to create a Pinterest board, which is easily shareable, maybe an Instagram folder of saved imagery. You could create a physical mood board where you print things out and stick them down. Or maybe you just want to save a load of screenshots into an album on your phone. There's loads of ways of going about this. Find out which is best for you, which you find easiest. The way that you actually intend to create your mood board isn't that important. It's just important that you can put together a mood board that creates a concise vision of what you're looking for. Again, the purpose of a mood board is to solidify your vision. So it's got to be really clear when you look at this mood board, this is what they're going for. This is the tone. These are the kind of ideas that we want to get out of this. So if we look at the mood board that I created for the World Soccer Shop shoot, you can see that all of this found imagery really communicates a Britishness. It's images drawn from popular grime photographers such as Vicky Grout, and also editorials from things like Soccer Bible that really convey the Britishness, British locations, that grungy urban kind of look that the client is going for. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about how you actually build your team. So this creative team I keep talking about, how do we produce that? If you are a creative producer or director, then this one is really important for you because it's likely that either you or the brand director is going to be doing this team building. For the World Soccer Shop shoot, I was in charge of building the team. Often as a photographer, you might also be granted some of the similar roles as a producer or creative director. So let's move on to the next lesson and talk about building your team. So when it comes to building your team, you need to think about who you actually need there. So first things first, you're going to need models. You want to have models, you're going to need your photographer, maybe a videographer, maybe someone to do socials. So this is like TikTok and Reels content. It tends to be short form video. Sometimes the videographer will do that. Sometimes you need a separate person. You can also consider having an assistant on set. This is really important if you're shooting on location because you'll be moving about a lot and you probably have a lot of equipment, a lot of clothing that you might need the extra hands to move it all about. A stylist is also really important. Later on in the class, we're going to get on to styling a little bit more, but having a stylist on set will help you to ensure that the clothes are looking their best, that they're paired with clothes that work well, and that they're presenting your brand properly. And then finally, a hair and makeup artist. So you might need someone for makeup or male grooming or something like that. Not all shoots need every single person that I've just listed, but it's kind of up to your discretion as to who you feel is most important on that set. You want to think about the advantages of having each, as well as, of course, the budget of the shoot and how many people you can afford on the shoot. I also recommend trusting the expertise of your team. So if you are unsure about something and you maybe haven't creatively produced a shoot before, maybe you're a brand owner who hasn't commissioned a shoot before and you're unsure as to whether or not you might need these extra hands, then confide in one of the other members of your team. Ask the photographer, for example, who might be more experienced than you are in terms of shooting fashion lookbooks, as to whether or not they think this person is needed and can they recommend someone for the job. When it comes to finding models, there are a few different ways you can go about this. You can look to modeling and talent agencies. You can go on Instagram and try and scout on Instagram. You can even do some street scouting where you look for people literally in everyday life. Something I look for when I'm scouting models is if their overall vibe fits the mood board and the tone of the shoot. So styling is really important to me. If they dress in a way that fits the vibe of the brand, then I kind of know that they'll probably be a good fit already. For this shoot in particular, My brief was quite specific in that we wanted to include grime and football. So one of the things that I did was I looked for grime artists in the UK, and in particular grime artists that already had an interest in football, which really helped to narrow down the field of what I was looking at. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about choosing your locations for the shoot. So just like when you're choosing your models, you want to really think about the mood board and the vibe of the shoot and whether or not the locations are going to match that vibe and that tone. For me, that is the first thing that I think about when I think about location. So in this shoot with World Soccer Shop, they said to me that they want it to be really British. So I had to think about what are really British locations. For me, coming from South London, one of the things that I often get frustrated about is the way that London is portrayed as, you know, just Parliament and Big Ben and Buckingham Palace, these key iconic features. When actually, if you're from London, you know that London is so much more. It's the communities, it's the bits that aren't the tourist traps as such. So when I was conveying Britishness within this shoot, that's what I wanted to tap into. I wanted to really look at what it actually means to be British. Where are the places that we go to? Where are the places we hang out? What are things that you can tell are just British? So I was thinking about things like housing areas, residential areas, housing estates, transport links like the tube, the buses, British pubs. You know, English pubs are something that's quite iconic, I guess. Alongside that, I was thinking about markets. You know, we have like Sunday markets and things like that. And these are all things that are very much a part of British culture. So these are things I wanted to tap into when it came to location. But that is just the first thing to think about when it comes to locations. There are so many other things that you want to explore. So firstly, you want to consider the weather. So, you know, you might not have an idea of what the weather is going to be like on the day of the shoot, because at this point you might not have even picked a day for the shoot. If this is the case, what I would recommend is thinking about, okay, if it does rain, let's say it's the worst case scenario, it's a storm, are there places undercover? Is this place going to get really muddy that we can't use it? These are the things you want to think about. You kind of want to take the worst case scenario and think, if this was to happen, can we still use this location? Will it still work? And that's the same with the lighting. Again, you might not know what time of day it's going to be, and lighting is even more unpredictable than the weather. But it's a good idea to think about, okay, so this location, there's no shade at all. So if it's a really bright day, how are we going to tackle the lighting? Things like lighting aren't things that will really decide on your location, but they are things that you want to be considerate of when you're thinking about how you're going to use that location so that you're not caught off guard on the day. Another thing you want to think about are colours. So when it comes to colours, you probably have an idea of what clothing you're going to shoot. You want to make sure that the locations that you're choosing are going to work well with the colours of the clothing. I have a full class on Skillshare about colour theory. If you want to check that out, I will link that one in the description as well. But colour theory essentially explores how different colours work well with each other. And that's something you're going to want to really consider when it comes to finding a location. The next three things you want to consider are less to do with the aesthetics of the location and more to do with the logistics. Firstly, you're going to want to think about health and safety. Is it safe for you to take everyone onto this set? There's no risk of injury, things like that. You know, of course, there's risk of injury always, but you don't want to go to a specifically very dangerous place just in case things are particularly dangerous there and someone gets hurt. For example, you probably don't want to break into like an unsafe structure or something. Not only for the actual health and safety, but that doesn't represent the brand very well. It doesn't reflect on them in a great light. Next, you're going to want to think about permits. Is this public land or is it private land? Is it accessible or do you need a permit? Do you need to ring up your council and say, can we shoot in this space? Often if it's a small production, you can get away with not using a permit, but it does depend on the location you're shooting in. So I would double check that. And then lastly, you're going to want to think about having locations that aren't too far away from each other. And if they are far away from each other, how are you going to get all of your talent, all of your team to that next location? And is there budget for taxis, etc. to do that? In the next lesson, we'll talk a little bit more about the logistics of timings, especially when it comes to location. So join me in the next lesson as we talk about designing your shoot schedule. So now that you have your team selected and you have your locations sorted, it's time to design your schedule. And this bit is when the shoot really starts to come together. This is when you're thinking about where do people need to be, when, what are we going to shoot here, where are we going to shoot it. When I'm working out schedules, I usually have 3 columns. I usually have the time, I then have who's going to be on set and the location. As a bonus column, you could also have the specific outfits you're going to shoot in that location. That helps to ensure that you're shooting the right outfits in the right locations. So like I said before, where locations are is really important to the shoot logistics and schedule. You want to bunch nearby locations together. So if you have 3 locations that are really near each other, consider doing those consecutively so that you're not going, back and forth. You can just move through those and then move on to the next area where the other locations are. When it comes to like number of locations, I try to not shoot too much in the same location. So I might shoot one shirt in one location with one model and then find another little area within that location, another backdrop as per se within that location to shoot the other model in the other shirt. And that's how I did it with this World Soccer shoot. This just means you're not moving about too much, but there's still diversity and variety in the shots. You really don't want all of the clothing to be shot with the same backdrop. So another thing to think about when you're designing your schedule, and this one's really important, is you need to think about how much time you have with each model. So it might be that you have an 8-hour shoot, but the models are only commissioned for 5 hours each. And that is what happened to me with this World Soccer Shop shoot. I had to consider how I was going to best utilize the models' times within the 5 hours that they were contracted to. So I designed the schedule to mean that there was a 2-hour overlap where all 4 models were on set. And that was so that I had 2 hours to shoot any group photos that I wanted. And then the morning we had Ransom and Tia, and they were on set together for 3 hours, just those 2. Then we had our 2 hours where all 4 models were on set, and then Tia and Ransom went home, and Denz and Renz were there for the final 3 hours. So you can focus on solo and pair shots in the morning. That 2 hours in the middle, you're going to have as the group shot, and then in the afternoon you're going to focus again on different pairs and different solos. Another thing to remember when you're writing your schedule is to include a break, include a lunch break, especially on a long shoot. It's important to keep everyone happy, especially on really long days. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea on how to structure your shoot, or maybe the best practices to be able to do that. In the next lesson, we're going to be continuing with logistics, and we're going to be talking about creating shot lists. So for me, writing a shot list is so important. I would be so stressed if I never had a shot list. You want to make sure that you get all of the stuff that the client wants, all the content that the client needs. You don't want to miss anything. So having a shot list beforehand is really important to be able to tick things off as you go. It will make you feel a lot more organized and on top of things when it comes to the shoot. You can even run the shot list past the client before the shoot to make sure that you've included everything, or if there's anything that they want you to add to the shot list. Some clients will give you a shot list from the beginning, which is obviously a lot easier, but in the cases where they don't give you a shot list, you can write your own. Again, refer to the brief and just make sure you're hitting all of those key points of what the client wants. I usually have my shot list as a tickable list in my notes page on my iPhone, but you can do this in so many different ways. You can do it on your phone, you could have a traditional pen and paper and write it down and cross it or tick it out as you go along. Brand owners, directors, work with your creative team to create this shot list. Tell them what you need and ask for their expertise. Do they think that this is feasible within this time frame? They'll be able to give you answers based on their experience as to what they think is feasible within that time frame. This is a much better way of working than demanding too much from them and them being overwhelmed by it. So now we've designed our shot list, we've got our schedule, we've got our location, we've got our models. The final thing before we start shooting is to start thinking about styling. So join me in the next lesson as we discuss a little bit about styling. So I want to start off this lesson by recommending that you do hire a stylist for the shoot. Since you're working in fashion, the styling is so important, and having someone whose sole job is making sure that the clothes look right will be a massive weight off of your shoulders, off of the team's shoulders. That being said, here are some things to consider when it comes to styling, whether you have a stylist or not. So if you're pairing items from clothing ranges with other items that aren't from the brand, opt for neutral items and colours. The main focus should be on the clothing that the brand is selling. So make sure that that clothing doesn't belong to a different brand, especially competing brands. You don't want to be promoting any other brand other than the brand that you're being paid to promote. If the models are bringing their own clothes, so for example shorts or trousers or things like that, and they have to be branded because they don't have anything else available, then you need to think about the way you're shooting this. Can you shoot in a way that crops out the brand logos, doesn't make it obvious what brand this is, and if not, is it possible that you can retouch those out of the photos in post? Of course, it's much easier to do it in camera, so if you can do it in camera, then do, because you don't want to be spending too much time, photoshopping logos out of things. So when it comes to a lookbook, the idea is that viewers see themselves in the clothes. They can envision how they would wear these clothes. Feel free to style the items, have the models wear them in unique ways, but also try to make it relatable to the audience. And also, if you are going to be styling them in like loads of different ways, I would also include shots where they're just wearing them like quite straight on, normally as such, so that you can see the whole product, just for good measure. Another thing to remember is to make sure that logos, important graphics and things like that are clearly visible. They're not bunched up, they're not screwed up so that you can't like read them, and warped and stuff like that. If you're focusing on a key graphic, then it needs to be clear. If you need to steam or iron the clothes before the shoot, then remember to do so, but also consider how you're going to pack all of that stuff and move it between locations. You want to minimize creasing, minimize damage, so really have a plan in mind as to how you're going to transport all those clothing items to make sure that they don't get damaged. And like I said before, some things can be retouched after shoot, but it is easier to get it right during taking the actual photos. So now we've run through, all of this stuff that is really important to understand before we get into shooting. It's now time to go onto our photo shoot. So join me in the next lesson as we go through some of the tips that I have for shooting fashion lookbooks on location. So you now understand the brief, you know what you're shooting, you know where you're shooting it, and you know when you're shooting. It's now time to get started. Here are some of my top tips when it comes to shooting lookbooks on location, and by location I mean outdoors, in locations that aren't in a studio. So firstly, my tip for you guys is to split off one by one if you have a videographer or a social person on team. So for example, with this shoot, I had an amazing team with me, and I had Fuad, who was in charge of shooting the social content, so short form videos for TikTok and Instagram, things like that. So there was two of us, and like I said earlier, there was two models in the morning. So the way that we operated here was I took ransom off and took some stills, and during that time Fuad took Tia and shot some video stuff, and then halfway through the allocated time we switched. Then we finished off by doing the pairs, where it was mostly focused on capturing stills, but we did split that time again so that we got some video content. When it came to shooting the groups, that 2 hours where we had all four models, we split that time in a way that meant I would shoot the stills at the beginning, and then Fuad would shoot the video in the second half. And then again, when it was just Dens and Rens in the afternoon, we did it so that Fuad took Dens first for the video content and I took Rens for the stills, and then swapped over halfway through. So this is just, it makes sense to do both at once, rather than having a whole hour where I'm shooting stills, whole hour where Fuad is shooting video, and the models that we're not shooting are just kind of hanging around. So try to really make sure that you are making the most out of the time that you have. My second tip is quite specific to photographers who are shooting both digital content and film, as in analog photography. And again, this does come down to your personal style and your confidence with both mediums. But for me, I shoot digital first. And the reason I do that is because it's quicker. It's easier to get you and your models warmed up and into the flow of shooting by starting off with shooting the digitals first and then pinpointing the bits that you want to shoot in film secondly. Thirdly, goes back to when we're talking about building your schedule, and have an idea of what clothing you're going to shoot in which location. And this is a good idea to match, again, colours. So for example, if you know that you're going to be shooting in a location that has loads of red, then you have a red shirt, then maybe shoot that red shirt there if you're going for that monochromatic kind of colour scheme. Next up is probably the most important tip that I've spoken about so far, and that is to remember to shoot different angles. So what I mean by that is shooting a wide shot so that you can see the entire front of a football shirt, shooting the back of the shirt to shoot the entire back of the shirt, and then shooting side on, and then making sure that you also get details, you get logos, you get textures of shirts. Make sure you get a whole picture of the clothing items that you are photographing. You'll see in this shoot that I generally did wide shots, mid shots, and then details. And then I asked the model to turn around, wide shots, mid shots, details. And that's a great way of remembering to tick off all the things that should be on your shot list. Number 5 is quite closely related to that, in that you want to make sure you are shooting a mixture, a variety of different aspect ratios. You want to shoot things in portrait, you want to shoot things in landscape, you want to make sure that it's going to be able to be used on web, on like website banners, on Instagram stories. You want to make sure that you are shooting a variety of different aspect ratios so that the client has enough content to use it throughout their whole campaign. Number 6, again, is talking about variety. We're talking about making sure you have a good mixture of solo shots and group shots. And a big tip that I have for you when it comes to shooting solos and groups is to still focus on shooting like solo items, solo people, solo items. And this is because there might be an instance where the brand has, let's take the World Soccer Shop as an example. The brand have the Liverpool shirts on sale, but you know, the Chelsea shirts, they're not on sale anymore. And if I only have photos of my models wearing both of those shirts in the same image, then there's no content for the brand to use when the Chelsea shirts are not on sale anymore. So it's fine to get those groups, it's fine to get those doubles. It does produce a great amount of content to be able to use, but you want to make sure that you also have the solos, the stuff that the brand can use when it's not maybe applicable to put out a set where people are wearing all different things. My last tip when it comes to shooting is to choose poses that flatter the clothing. You know, again, this comes back to what I was saying about styling. You don't want logos to be bunched up. You want the clothes to look good. The whole point is that you're selling these clothes to an audience. You want the audience to think that the clothes look good. And again, this comes back to having a stylist on your team to help you make sure that the clothes do always look good. So in the next lesson, we're going to be talking about shooting in studio and some of the things that you're going to need to consider versus shooting on location. When it comes to shooting fashion lookbooks, the steps are often the same, whether you're shooting on location or you're shooting in studio. But there are some things you want to consider if you are deciding to shoot the lookbook in the studio rather than on location. So when shooting for websites and e-commerce platforms, and you're looking for that really clean e-com look where it's just showing off the clothing, it's not really lifestyle orientated, consider marking a spot on the floor for you to stand and also a spot on the floor for the model to stand. And this will ensure consistency, especially when you are doing those traditional e-com photos that show like the front, the side, the back. Another thing to think about when you're shooting in studio is that it's a much more minimal location. So especially if you're shooting with a photo cove or colorama backdrops and you're really taking use of that minimal vibe. So this is something to consider if this matches the vibe and the tone of the brand that you're shooting for. You also need to consider lighting a little bit more so than when you're shooting on location. So whereas you can rely a lot on the natural light on location, when working in a studio, depending on the studio itself, your natural light can be restricted. So you're going to need to have a better understanding of how to use artificial lights such as strobe lighting or continuous lights. So whilst those are considerations, there are definite advantages to shooting your lookbooks in the studio. The first one that comes to mind is that you have a base for the day. It's easier to steam your clothing, keep it ironed, to organise items when you have one place that you're not moving from. It's also a great way to store additional items like lighting, or extra cameras, film, etc., so that you're not moving everything around in locations, you just have a base for the day. And secondly, it's not weather dependent. So when we were talking before about finding locations and thinking about the weather and if you'd be able to shoot there in a thunderstorm, for example, you know, one of the most frustrating things about shooting on location is that the weather can affect the outcome of your shoot. whereas in a studio you don't have that to worry about. So we're now at a point in this class where we have gone through the practical tips of planning and executing your photo shoot. In the next lesson, we're going to be looking through some of the photos that I took during the World Soccer Shop shoots. So join me in the next lesson where we're going to be looking at the content that I shot for the World Soccer Shop English Premier League 2022 lookbook. So throughout this class, you have heard my best practices for organising, producing and shooting a fashion lookbook. It's now time to take a look at some of the photos that I took during the World Soccer Shop English Premier League 2022 lookbook shoot, and we're going to discuss some of the thought processes behind these shots, as well as looking at the actual lookbook that is on the client's website. So first up here we have a photo of Denz, who is wearing the Arsenal shirt. The reason why I feel this photo in particular is successful is, we have ideas of colour theory here. We have the red in the shirt that matches the red in the location. We also have the Arsenal and the Adidas, Emirates logos displayed really clearly. The Adidas and the Emirates are the key sponsors here, and we can see those really clearly, as well as identifying who the shirt is for. And we can see some of those details, the zigzag details, the 3 stripes for the Adidas on the shoulders. The next photo here we have is Ransom wearing the same shirt. And this is a digital photo, whereas the other one is on film. You might be able to tell in the difference of quality of image. Again, we've got that colour matching between his red shirt and the red of the location, as well as clear logos. We're also looking at the fit of the shirt, the movement. He's pulling the shirt, he's, you can kind of envision as a viewer how you would be wearing the shirt and how the shirt would be fitting you. And shots like these also pay specific attention to the details of the shirts. This photo is a duo shot, a pair shot of Ransom and Tia, and you can see that they're both wearing different shirts, but you can also see that the colours do match. So we've got the red and the red of the location. We've also got the blue and the blue of the location. You can see that it's a market setting. We've got that really down to earth kind of vibe. We've got some quite dynamic lighting where we are backlighting the subject and we're causing that little bit of side light on the side of Ransom and the shirt, which is just really flattering for the clothing. You can also in this image see how the different shirts fit on different body types. Obviously Ransom is a man and Tia is a woman, and you can see how those could be styled depending on how you look or how you want to wear clothes. So join me in the next lesson where we're going to be looking at the content that I shot for the World Soccer Shop English Premier League 2022 lookbook. Focusing on the sponsor detail on his arm, we're focusing on the texture of the shirt and the patterns that the shirt provides. We've also got a view of the back of the shirt and how it falls. So this image of Renz wearing the Arsenal shirt, we can see that it's a landscape image with plenty of negative space. So that is all of this space here on the Arsenal, the back of the shirt, on the wall, where that could be allowed for web graphics and overlays if it was going to be a header or a different kind of image. Same goes with this image here with all this negative space on the wall. It can be used as a header. This image is tapping into that Britishness. We've got a really this is a London bus stop. It's something that you'll see dotted throughout London. It's quite reminiscent of London. And again, focusing on the details here of the sponsors of the shirt, as well as the patterns. In this shot, you can see that we do have some branded shoes, but they're Nike, and the shirt is sponsored by Nike. So we've matched that up. That's why in some of the other images, the images are cropped further up mid shots, because the models are wearing Nike shoes, but maybe an Adidas top, and you don't want to cross promote those brands. Again, in this location, you have all the colours working really harmoniously together with that pop of red on the wall and the red on the shirt. These photos of Denz and Renz together, this is an example of a shot that you wouldn't use when, for example, Chelsea is not on sale, but it does work for the editorial concept, especially when the first lookbook is released. And again, we've looked at that really British vibe. We're outside a shop, like a grocer's, that you'll find a lot in London. Next up, let's take a look at the actual lookbook on the client's website. So as soon as we come onto the website, you can see here the banner straight away that is talking about the lookbook that we've just shot. So if I click on the lookbook, it's going to open up the full lookbook that has been designed by the team over at World Soccer Shop, and they've done an amazing job. So the first shot is a film photo that I took of Ransom. That line across the middle of the photo, that's not actually, you know, edited on. That was a light leak from the photo. And you can see that the client have really embraced that kind of vintage retro vibe. Apologies if you can hear my laptop whirring away in the background. I'll try and minimize it in post, but you know, that's what you get when you have a really old laptop. So this image is used for the front of the lookbook, and it sets the tone for what's to come. You've got that graffiti in the background telling you that it's kind of like an urban vibe. You can see the logo of Manchester United on the front of the shirt really clearly, so you know, okay, we're talking about the English Premier League teams here. So this is the opening page. This is where group shots come into play. So when they're presenting the concept of English Premier League, you've got 4 teams here. You've got your Arsenal, you've got your Tottenham, you've got your Chelsea, and you've got your Liverpool, and you've got all 4 models that are going to be presented throughout the book. Think of this as like an establishing shot. I'm guessing you guys like to watch TV or film, and one of the conventions of film and TV is that you have this establishing shot that tells the viewer where you are, what you're looking at, and this is essentially what you're doing with this first page. So here we can see that this entire page is dedicated to Arsenal, and we're looking at the different ways in which Ransom is wearing the Arsenal shirt. So we've got different angles displaying different elements and the way that the shirt falls onto Ransom. Next up, you've got Dens and Wrens. So here you've got a similar page to the Arsenal page with Tottenham, and again we're having a look at how the shirt looks on 2 different models here, which is really great because, you know, not everyone's built the same, not everyone's got the same body type, so it's great to be able to see different models wearing different clothes to try and envision as a viewer how you might wear them. So next up you've got the United page, and with the Man United page you can see that again you've got 3 different models here wearing the same shirt, how it falls on them, how it looks, and you've also got a photo of some of the details. This next spread for Manchester City, again demonstrating some of the details and how the shirt fits on all 4 models here. And on this page with Chelsea, you can see again, it's a very much, you know, it's a format that is continued throughout the whole lookbook. You have the details, you've got different models wearing the shirts, and you're just exploring the different ways that you can wear the shirts, the different features of the shirts, the different attributes, textures, graphics that the shirts have to offer. So now we flick through the lookbook that I worked on most recently, you have a good idea of maybe how photos can be used in lookbooks and what maybe the client is looking for when they are commissioning you to shoot content for lookbooks. Or if you're a client, you have an idea of maybe how your end lookbook might look and what you need to ask of from your creative team. So join me in the final lesson as we summarize the key points from today's class. Congratulations if you have made it to this point in the class. It means you've gone through all of my top tips, my best practices when it comes to the pre-production and the production of a lookbook. Before you go off and shoot your very own lookbooks, I want to run through just some of the key takeaways in this class. So first of all, remember you need to take time to understand the brief. What does the client need? This will dictate your shot list. Who is the client? What niche are they in? This is going to dictate the tone or the vibe of your shoot. Make sure that you can represent the brief to your whole team in a way that everyone is on the same page. So when it comes to locations and tone and vibe, something to think about is the fact that, you know, the understanding the brief and what you've got from the brief and what you've got from who the client is and what their niche is going to dictate a lot of your location. So for example, if you're shooting for a brand that is all suit wear, you know, men's suits, you're probably not going to shoot that on a basketball court. However, a shoot for a basketball apparel brand, you might shoot on a basketball court, but you're not going to shoot it in, you know, a business area of high-rise offices and stuff like that. Secondly, stay organized. Have a schedule that allows enough time to get all of the work done. You don't want to be caught short. So, you know, over prepare there. So if you think something's going to take half an hour, give yourself an hour. Have a shot list. This is just going to make it so much easier for everyone on set to know what is needed and pre-plan your locations so you're not worried about, oh my gosh, we need to find a location, we don't know where we are, what's near, we don't want to be walking for half an hour. It's really important to plan those locations so you have in mind where you're going to be going and shooting each clothing items. And then my bonus tip, which I haven't actually mentioned in the rest of this class, is when it comes to editing, ensure that you're not changing the colours in the clothing. You want it to be an accurate representation of what the buyer will receive. So for example, if I buy a black top, I don't want it to turn up and it actually be navy. A simple tool that is going to ensure that you are accurately representing the colours is the before and after tool in Lightroom. It allows you to view the original photo next to your edit, and you can tweak it to make sure that the colours are exactly how you photographed it or how you saw it. If your camera is kind of distorting the colours, something I like to do is grab my phone and also take a shot on my phone so you have secondary evidence as to what the colours in the shirts or the clothing are like. But that is all from me, and I cannot wait for you guys to head out and shoot your lookbooks. Please do remember to post your photos in the project gallery afterwards. I'd love to take a look and give a little bit of feedback. It's also really useful for other people taking this class to see examples of what you guys have created. If you have any questions at all, then please don't hesitate to let me know. But best of luck in shooting your first lookbook.